Good evening. I forgot to take the cover off. All right. Hello. So, um, getting back into Star Wars. Getting a late start tonight, but we have two readings left in the Old Republic Annihilation. So I wanted to make sure I stayed, even if I'm late. I wanted to keep with it and get through this book. Um, and I switched to Wednesdays to try to be more um, less sporadic about it. And more consistent. That's the word I was looking for. And I have not done very well. So we'll get into it. Anyway, doesn't matter. We'll just read our two chapters, and then we will got two chapters left after tonight. Okay, so we're on to chapter 30. Encased within the crystal sphere of her command pod, Darth Carrad could feel the power of the Ascendant Spear course through the wires attached to the implants in her neck, face, and skull. The wires twitched and twisted like they were alive, pulsing with energy and matching the rhythm of her racing heart as it sent blood rushing through her veins. Her excitement was more than the anticipation of the coming battle. Guiding the ship through the extra-dimensional landscape of hyperspace was exhilarating, a thrill beyond any other mental or physical pleasure. She had transcended her shell of flesh and bone, becoming one with the Ascendant Spear, as planets and stars flew past her on all sides. Sensed rather than seen, vanishing from her awareness in seconds as they were left trillions of kilometers behind her. She could feel the presence of her apprentice and his two new companions outside the confines of the pod as she fed off them to enhance and augment her connection to the dark side and to the ship. Yet she realized that, eager as she was to get to Duro, she had to pace herself. Her second apprentice was still watching guard over Nostaral, and though Lord Quux and Lord Ordez were strong, they were still not used to the unique strain of supporting her while she controlled the spear. She had to be careful not to exhaust them before the battle. The ship slowed ever so slightly in response to her unspoken directive, allowing her to conserve her strength as they continued to hurtle to their destination. Moff Nazor, commander of the Imperial capital ship Extempus, relished the moments before leading his fleet into battle. The attack on the agro-world Ruan had been a glorious victory, but it would pale compared with the devastation he planned to unleash against Duro. As with the previous attack on an unsuspecting, lightly defended Republic world, the plan was elegant in its simplicity. Hit the Duro shipyards to cripple production, bombard the orbiting cities to inflict maximum damage and casualties, then retreat before Republic reinforcements in the sector could respond to the threat. Nezor approved of this recent shift in imperial tactics, while some, like Davidge, the prissy minister of logistics, might agree that the Empire gained little tangible benefit from an attack on Duro. The Grand Moff understood the psychological value of striking soft targets with the primary purpose of massacre and mayhem, and personally he much preferred an unopposed run against a heavily populated civilian world to a lengthy engagement against Republic defenders over a resource-rich planet with high long-term strategic value. 2 minutes to Duro, Moff Nazor, the navigator seated on the other side of the bridge informed him. Ready a general comm channel, Nazor commanded, eager to begin issuing orders to direct his fleet's assault the instant they dropped from hyperspace. Aye, aye, sir. A smile crept across Nazor's thin, cracked lips. He felt the familiar surge of deceleration, and the star field outside the bridge's view window transformed from solid white to the star field of real space. They arrived on the edges of the Duro system, far enough from the sun's gravity well, but still only a few minutes from the world itself. But instead of seeing the eponymous planet and its orbiting cities in the distance, helpless and at their mercy, Moff Nazor found himself facing an entire Republic fleet stretched out before him, arrayed for battle. Impossible, he thought, shouting out, "Full shields!" even as the enemy opened fire. Jace Malcolm kept his eyes carefully focused on the battle monitors on board the bridge of the Aegis in the moments before the battle began. From the intercepted cipher transmissions, he knew the Empire was sending a fleet designed for a cowardly hit-and-run assault. Moff Nazor's capital ship, Extempus, a Delta-class carrier with a full complement of 2 dozen interceptors, 2 dreadnoughts, and 3 destroyers. On the Republic side, Jace had called in all military vessels in the sector, 3 capital ships, including the Aegis, 4 hammerheads, 6 corvettes, and 4 support squads of 8 Thunderclap fighters. The Empire was outgunned by a greater than 3-to-1 margin, but Jace wasn't taking any chances. If the Ascendant Spear was with them, the Empire had the edge. He had already given the commanders of the other capital ships the order to concentrate their fire exclusively on the spear the instant it dropped from hyperspace, hoping to inflict some significant damage before Carad could activate her shields. At the same time, the rest of his fleet would focus on the Extempus and the remaining Imperials. The monitor began to flash with Imperial vessels blinking into existence on the scanner as they dropped out of hyperspace. The hammerheads and corvettes opened fire on the enemy, but per Jace's orders, the capital ships held off, waiting for the spear. The Extempus suffered several direct hits before its shields came up, giving it a momentary reprieve. A destroyer exploded, as a lucky shot from one of the corvettes ruptured the hypermatter core. The other destroyers, the dreadnoughts and the carrier, managed to escape significant damage in the initial assault. Jace continued to stare at the screen, trying to will the Ascendant Spear to materialize. The Thunderclaps dived into the fray, 2 squadrons swarming the Extempus, while the others 2 each went for one of the dreadnoughts. The corvettes descended on the carrier, trying to disable it before it was able to deploy interceptors in its hold. Supreme Commander Jace, Admiral Gorwin radioed from one of the other capital ships. No sign of the Ascendant Spear. Permission to engage other targets. Permission granted, Jace growled, his hands gripping the arms of his command chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He turned to where Satil and Tethys were standing in a corner of the bridge. Darth Carad is coming, the Jedi assured him. We can't wait any longer, Jace replied. Not if we want to minimize Republic casualties. He turned to the comm terminal that connected him to the other sections of the ship. Concentrate fire on the Extempus. Make Nazor pay for what he did to Ruan. The bridge of the Extempus was dark, lit only by the dim illumination of emergency lighting and the glow of the panels from the consoles that lined the perimeter. We just lost the Dravilla, or Dravilla, I'm not sure. His first officer informed him. Outside the view window, Moff Nazor could see the doomed destroyer as it was engulfed in a series of explosions. Shield status, he demanded. Under 20%. Nazor had come expecting a slaughter. He'd found one, but there was no denying he was on the wrong side. Even without the advantage of surprise, the Republic force he was facing would have crushed his fleet. But if he was going to die, it wouldn't be while attempting a retreat. Set a course for the nearest orbital city, he ordered. Full speed ahead. The helmsman hesitated before a lifetime of Imperial training compelled him to obey the suicide order. Aye, aye, sir. If this was Nazor's final battle, he was going to take as many Republic lives with him as possible. Jace saw the Extempus change course and accelerate, though it took him a few seconds to realize what Nazor was planning. All ships concentrate full fire on the Extempus, he shouted, transmitting his orders across the entire Republic fleet. They're trying to crash into the cities. Following his command, the entire Republic fleet, minus 6 fighters that were lost during the battle, disengaged from their targets and turned toward the Imperial flagship. Seeing the opportunity, the rest of the Imperial fleet began a full retreat in the opposite direction, desperately trying to put enough distance between them and the Republic ships to safely activate their hyperdrives and escape with their lives. Carrad braced herself for a moment of disorientation as the ascendant spear dropped out of hyperspace in the Duro's system, though it only took a fraction of a second for the sensors to adjust to the physical laws and dimensions of real space and come back online. In her state of heightened acuity, the delay felt like an eternity. The instant her hyperspace-induced blindness passed, however, she was able to pinpoint the location of every ship across the entire battlefield. The spear had appeared well beyond the edges of the Duro system, rather than where she expected the Republic ambush would engage Nazor's fleet. The lifeless remains of several Imperial vessels floated silently in the distance. Beyond them, a single vessel, Nazor's Extempus, was racing toward Duro itself, with Republic ships giving chase. The surviving remnants of the Imperial fleet, a dreadnought destroyer and a handful of interceptors, were headed in the opposite direction, toward Carrad and the edges of the system. Facing overwhelming odds, they'd chosen to abandon their command and flee the battle. Carrad's fingers tapped lightly at the control pad on the arm of her chair, sending signals shooting up the wires linking into her cybernetic implants and off to the ship itself. The Ascendant Spear responded to her commands by targeting the approaching Imperial vessels as they lowered their shields in preparation for the jump to hyperspace. Never suspecting one of their own would fire at them, the Spear's ion cannons tore into the defenseless ships, blasting them into cosmic dust as a reward for their cowardice. The Spear changed course as Carrad sent it accelerating toward the Republic vessels. Still too far away for even her incomparable weapons, she targeted the enemy flagship and prepared to fire as soon as she got into range. Theron had felt the spear drop from hyperspace, the screaming drive core mercifully winding down as it did. When the ship's sensors came online, he was already plugged in, lurking in the corners of the network just beyond Carrad's consciousness. Even though he was receiving data in real time, he was still caught off guard when she fired on the advancing Imperial vessels. Not that he would have done anything to stop her, even if he'd been expecting it, but the speed and precision with which she dispatched her targets reinforced his earlier fears that the spear was going to win the battle despite his best efforts. He pushed the negative thoughts from his mind as Carrad advanced on the Republic fleet in the distance. His link to the ship gave Theron a rough idea of the Republic numbers, but the data was coming too quickly for him to fully process it. Not that it mattered. His attention needed to be focused on the interior? The internal workings of the spear, if he had any hope of slowing Carrad down. As the targeting system came online, Theron used his slicer spike to upload one of his virus subroutines, praying it would work. Nazor's desperate suicide run never had a chance, but that didn't keep Jace from cursing under his breath as the Republic fleet bombarded the Imperial flagship. When the Extempus's shields went down, exhausted by the constant barrage of enemy fire, he pumped his fist. A second later, he stood up and let out a primal victory roar as a series of explosions tore the vessel apart, eliminating the threat. Darth Carrad is here, Satele suddenly declared, abruptly ending his celebration. Jace slammed himself back into his chair, his eyes flicking back and forth over the screen depicting the battlefield. Where? I don't see it. A second later, a ship appeared on the very edge of scanner range, and he didn't need the helmsman's confirmation to know it was the Ascendant Spear. Never in doubt, he heard Tethys say, though it sounded more like she was speaking to herself. All ships prepare for battle, he barked out. We do whatever it takes to bring the spear down. The ships in the fleet turned away from the smoking wreckage of the Extempus, carving a wide arc as they circled around to head in the opposite direction. The spear was closing on them fast, though it was still too far away to engage. Look at the size of that beast, the helmsman gasped, as the sensors threw up the enemy vessel's dimensions on his readout. Shields up, prepare to fire the second we come in range, Jace ordered, knowing full well the spear's guns would be able to tear them apart long before they ever got close enough to retaliate. Come on, Theron, don't let us down. Sir, the helmsman warned, enemy fire incoming. Brace for impact, Jace shouted as his screen showed the incoming ion blasts. He prayed the shields would hold, but to his surprise, the blast flew high and wide. She missed, the helmsman said, shocked. Flat out missed us. Target in range, the gunner told him. Jace bared his teeth in a fierce grin. Hit her back with everything we've got. Darth Carrad saw her shot miss its mark, but it took her a second to wrap her mind around what had happened. The target hadn't taken any evasive maneuvers or deflected the attacks with shields. She had just missed. She ran a quick diagnostic check of her targeting array, only to find it was entirely miscalibrated. It only took her a few seconds to correct the mistake, but in that time, the Republic vessels had come close enough to bring their own weapons to bear. Sensing the incoming fire, she redirected energy from the aft shields to reinforce the deflectors facing the advancing fleet. The incoming blasts were deflected harmlessly, and Carrad took aim for a second time, only to see her shot go wide yet again. As the Republic ships launched a second volley, Carrad reran the diagnostics on the targeting ray, isolated another error, and adjusted for it. An instant before the second round of incoming Republic fire hit, the aft shield suddenly surged to full capacity, draining all power from the forward deflectors. Instead of being easily repelled, the laser bolts and ion blasts smashed into the spear's hull, making Carrad cry out in pain. The damage was significant, and she tapped frantically at the control pad to reroute the affected systems through new relays and restore optimal efficiency, starting with the deflector shields. The Republic ships were fanning out as they drew closer, looking to surround her vessel so they could attack from all sides. Carrad engaged the sublight thrusters and veered sharply to starboard, tilting the nose of the spear down at a 45-degree angle and accelerating far too quickly for the Republic vessels to keep up. She dived down and away, buying time to fix her malfunctioning systems. She saw the Republic vessels trying vainly to pursue her, and then suddenly they were gone as the entire external sensor network went down. Completely blind to what lay outside her vessel, Carrad momentarily panicked, her arms flailing wildly and her head thrashing violently from side to side. The sensation of the wires connecting her to her ship slapping against her face and shoulders snapped her back to her senses, and in that instant she felt him. An intruder, an interloper, a saboteur on her ship, slicing into her private network. The violation enraged her. Bellowing out a roar, Carrad threw herself into the task of finding and destroying the enemy within. Her fury energized her, fueling the fires of the dark side that burned within her and her ship. Outside the crystal sphere of her command pod, she felt Lord Quux and Lord Ordez nearly break from the increased strain, though her apprentice never wavered. But as close as they came to failing her, they somehow managed to stay in their meditative trance, allowing Carrad to draw on their power to push herself and the spear far beyond their previous limits. Within seconds, she had rerouted all primary battle systems to new pathways, sealing off the old ones to isolate any potential viruses and keep them from spreading. The sensors came back online, as did the shields and her targeting array. Now that she knew the slicer was there, she was able to sense his next attack, disable it before it could take effect, and trace it back to its source. Security to the engine room, she hissed into the pod's comlink. She realized the slicer could probably hear her, but there was nothing she could do about it. The slicer tried to disrupt another system, but now that she knew where the attacks were coming from, it was easy to keep them from doing any real harm. The internal threat neutralized, she turned her attention back to the battle, just in time to throw up her shields to ward off another attack. Her evasive maneuver had separated her from the Republic fleet, but they were closing in once again. She took aim at the closest vessel, one of the hammerheads, and fired. When the Ascendant Spear suddenly veered away from the fleet and took off in an unexpected direction, Jace knew they had Carrad on the run. She's vulnerable, she said. Finish her off, now! Every ship in the Republic fleet scrambled to intercept the enemy vessel on its new course. Emboldened by the misfiring guns and the failing shields, they came in hard and fast, looking to put a quick end to the battle. The Aegis fired again, as did many of the other vessels, targeting the same location where they had pierced the shields and punctured the spear's hull in their previous attack. Rather than inflicting even more damage, the entirety of their attacks was deflected away. The guns of the spear opened fire again, but this time, instead of sailing wide, they scored a direct hit on one of the hammerheads. The combined power of the precisely aimed ion cannons and turbo lasers ripped through the shields and shredded the hammerhead, crippling the ship with a single devastating attack. "Pull back," Jace ordered, realizing their advantage had been lost. "Pull back and regroup." One of the corvettes was lost as the Republic fleet aborted its headlong charge, snuffed out by the spear's defense turrets when it got too close. Another blast from the ion cannons rocked the Aegis as it tried to retreat to a safe distance, sending Tefeth and Satil sprawling to the ground and nearly knocking Jace out of his command seat. "Damage report." "Shields took the worst of it. No critical system hit. We've lost power to Sector 4. Medical teams are on their way. Shields down to 70%. "Shields drained 30% from a single attack?" Jace marveled. An instant later, he was hit with the sobering realization that they didn't stand a chance. War raged across the entire galaxy. The Republic had brought in only as many ships as were in the vicinity. "Call for reinforcements," he said, knowing it would be hours before any ships stationed in other parts of the galaxy could reach them. "Take evasive action," he ordered the rest of the fleet. "Keep your distance." Even if they couldn't beat the spear, they could at least try to drag the battle out as long as possible to give Theron and Nosteral a chance to pull off a miracle. And that's the end of that chapter. Hey, Vesper! The Two Republics. Yes. Reading about the other Republic now. And the Empire. So we're on chapter 31. Theron ran back and forth along the engine room's narrow walkways, racing from relay to relay as he uploaded his virus subroutines. The first few worked perfectly, sending the spear's shots wide, dropping the shield, and disabling the sensors. Then Carrot had figured it out. He tried desperately to find new vulnerabilities to exploit, but each time he did, it only took 2 or 3 seconds for her to counteract his efforts. Still plugged into the ship's comm system and scanners, he heard her send security down to the engine room, and he let out a strangled cry of frustration when she destroyed the hammerhead. "She's too good, too fast, too smart. This isn't going to work." But she was also in the middle of fighting an entire Republic fleet. Her focus was on the weapons and shields, sensors and communications, all the things the spear needed to survive the battle. She still hadn't realized that he'd disabled the turbo lifts leading down to G-Deck to buy himself more time. She's on G-Deck too, the far side. If he couldn't stop Carrot remotely by slicing into the spear's systems, maybe he could stop her face to face. After all, he'd stopped Darth Mechas. That was different. You caught her off guard, tricked her. Carrot's going to be ready and she might not be alone. You're going to need help. Even if Carrot didn't realize he'd knocked out the turbolifts, he only had a couple more minutes before the ship's automated repair systems got them working again. He'd have to work fast. Grabbing his slicer spike, he tapped into the relay controlling Nosteral's holding cell. Carrot was still focused on protecting the critical battle systems, and he was able to worm his way inside. Nosteral had spent the hours since Darth Carrod's last visit in quiet, reflective meditation. As per the Sith Lord's instructions, the interrogators had spared him more torture with Mechas' infernal machine. The respite had allowed the Jedi to calm and focus his mind, subtly drawing on the Force to refresh and restore his ravaged body and spirit. The power of the dark side all around him was impossible to ignore. It seeped from the very walls of the Ascendant Spear, a twisted creation of a brilliant but diseased mind. Yet even here, surrounded by darkness, the power of the light shone through. The Force flowed through all living things, and there were several thousand crew on the ship. Most of them were ordinary men and women, soldiers for the Empire because of birth and upbringing, not because of some inherent evil. Careful not to do anything that might draw the attention of the pure-blooded apprentice, he sensed in the room with him, Nosteral drew upon the Force to grant him a picture of his surroundings. The first thing he sensed was the battle raging outside the ship. The Republic fleet had come to Duro, but it didn't take him long to realize they were overmatched, and he knew he It, he and he knew if he didn't do something, the battle would be lost. He turned his heightened perception inward, allowing him to construct a highly detailed picture of his holding cell. The interrogators were seated in chairs on the far side of the medium-sized room, next to the panel that could unleash unbearable horrors on their prisoner with a simple touch of a button. They were both male and both carried pistols at their sides. His protective goggles, Jedi robe, and other clothes had been discarded in the back corner of the room, tossed aside once he had been stripped down and strapped to the table. In the opposite corner of the room was the Sith apprentice, sitting cross-legged on the floor. She was turning the hilt of a lightsaber over and over in her hands, as if somehow drawn to it. Nosteral recognized the weapon he had forged while still a Padawan on Coruscant. She had witnessed his lightsaber skills during their battle. Now it seemed she was intent on finding some explanation in his weapon. Nosteral sensed and sympathized with her confusion. She had been raised to believe the power of the dark side dwarfed that of the light, and she was unable to convince herself that a Jedi could so easily have bested her in combat without some kind of inherent advantage. "I could teach you how to use that," he said. Startled, she glanced up at the prisoner, taking a moment to realize he was drawing on the Force to see her. "I know how to use a lightsaber," she said defensively. "I could teach you how to use it properly," he explained. "Not as a clumsy weapon guided by hate and anger, but as an extension of yourself that protects and defends those in need." The interrogators glanced over, their curiosity piqued by the exchange. Noticing them, the Sith stood up, suddenly self-conscious about sitting on the floor as if subservient to them. "Carad warned me to watch for your tricks," she said. "This is no trick. Carad is afraid of me. You sensed it, but I am not afraid of her." "Because you are stronger?" she sneered. "Because the light side teaches us not to be afraid. Don't you want to live free of fear and anger and hate?" For a second Nosteral felt a connection with her, and he thought he might reach her. Then a wall of blackness fell between them, and the connection was gone. "Your friends are dying out there," she said, her voice filled with spite and venom. "Can you feel it? Darth Carad and her ship were tearing them apart." She's still speaking. Sorry. "Can you feel it? Darth Carad and her ship are tearing them apart. I should be at her side for this victory to share in the glory, but instead I'm here watching over you." "Then go," Nosteral said. "I'm not the one keeping you." One of the interrogators laughed, and the Sith silenced him with an icy glare. "I don't need you or your weapon," she said to Nosteral, tossing his lightsaber into the corner of the room with the rest of his discarded property. Then she crossed her arms and stood with her back to the door, staring at him defiantly. The Jedi sighed, knowing the opportunity was lost, but before hope could slip away completely, the shackles on his wrists and ankles sprang open with a sharp click, dropping him to the floor. "Theron!" Nosteral reacted with the superior reflexes and blinding speed of a true Jedi Master. Already in motion before the others even realized something had gone wrong, he landed on his feet, his lightsaber flying from the corner and into the outstretched palm of his right hand, the blade springing to life with a sharp hiss. At the same time, his protective goggles flew up into his left hand, and he yanked them into place. One of the interrogators slammed his hand on the button to activate the machine, but with the prisoner already free of his restraints, nothing happened. His partner reacted with more sense, pulling his pistol. Darth Carad's apprentice made the wisest choice of all. She turned and fled out the door. The guard with the pistol fired, but Nosteral batted the blaster bolt aside. He saw the second guard reaching forward to hit the alarm and knocked him back with a powerful force push. Two quick steps closed the distance between them in the small room, and he ended both their lives with a pair of clean, efficient cuts of his glowing blade. Then he raced from the room in pursuit of Carad's apprentice, ignoring his Jedi robe and clothes still lying in the back corner of the room. He saw her disappear around a corner at the end of a 20-meter hall, and he gave chase. She was waiting for him as he rounded the corner, her own lightsaber drawn. She tried to impale him, hoping his momentum as he came barreling around the corner, would carry him right into the deadly tip of her outstretched blade. But Nosteral twisted to the side. Her thrust only traced a thin line across the topmost layer of skin of his bared chest. Ignoring the smell of his own charred flesh, he retaliated by driving an elbow into the Sith's jaw, sending her stumbling back. She threw up her lightsaber in a defensive stance to hold him off, but one on one she was no match for the Keldor. He came at her with a flurry of intense strikes, drawn from Juyo, the highly aggressive seventh form of lightsaber combat, designed specifically to overwhelm a lone opponent in a one-on-one duel. The chaotic patterns and haphazard sequences picked apart the Sith's defenses in a matter of seconds, the battle ending with Master Nosteral plunging his lightsaber through her chest and out the other side, impaling her as she had originally tried to do to him. As her corpse toppled to the floor, Nosteral was already on the move, headed directly for the spear's control room to face Darth Carid yet again. Theron had no idea if his plot to free Nosteral had worked or not. Just as he finished slicing into the holding cell systems and released the Jedi's restraints, Darth Carid shut him out, rerouting the pathway through another relay. Realizing she would soon do the same with the turbolift, he decided to get moving or he'd end up trapped in the engine room. Grabbing his slicer spike and tucking it into the top of his boot, he dashed over to the captain's uniform he'd carefully folded and set on the floor. He considered them quickly, rejected the idea of spending the time to pull it on. A stolen uniform wasn't going to fool the security teams converging on his location. Grabbing the pistol with the bent barrel just in case, he turned the wheel and pushed open the maintenance hatch. The corridor outside was blessedly cool. He actually shivered as the climate-controlled air washed over his sweat-soaked body. The sound of the nearby turbolift as it clanked into operation set him in motion. He had reached the first bend in the passage leading to the far side of G-Deck when he heard the door open. Glancing back, he saw several heavily armored security guards step out. Fortunately, it took them a moment to notice the man in his briefs running away from them at the far end of the hall. Theron had just enough time to dart around the corner as blaster bolts struck the ground and wall beside him, missing him by the narrowest of margins. Theron didn't think he'd have any trouble staying ahead of the imps in their heavy armor, but after half a dozen more running steps, he pulled up lame and cried out in pain, hopping on one foot as his left calf seized. Despite his efforts to stay hydrated during his time in the sweltering engine room, his body was rebelling. The muscle had cramped up, a brutal contraction so tight it felt as if it was going to rip itself apart. Any moment, any movement of his toes or ankle caused bolts of fire to shoot up through his body, and trying to put any weight on it almost made him pass out. Suddenly, the soldiers in the armor didn't seem that slow. Bracing himself with his left hand against the wall, he hopped down the corridor on his good foot, teeth clenched against the agony emanating from his knotted muscle. He heard the heavy footsteps of his pursuers closing in, and he half turned to fire off 3 quick shots back down the hall. He didn't bother to aim. His blaster's warped barrel would have made it impossible to guess where the bolts were headed. All he wanted to do was send a warning to his pursuers, hopefully slowing them down. The pistol made strange sounds as he fired. Instead of the familiar sharp, reverberating twang, the shots sounded almost wet, with a lower pitch. With the bolts impeded by the warped barrel, the blaster's power pack wasn't able to fully discharge. The intense energy buildup generated with each shot. He could feel the heat radiating out from the power pack in his hand, and he knew he couldn't keep shooting without risking a power pack overload and a deadly explosion of superheated gas. On the bright side, the cramp was fading as he rounded another corner and was able to carefully put weight on his left foot again, though he still wasn't able to run at full speed. He pressed onward, hobbling along and hoping the security team behind him was the only one he had to worry about. If there was another team coming down the lift near Carid's command chamber, he'd be trapped between them with no hope of escape. To his relief, when he rounded the final corner, he saw the long corridor leading to the entrance of the command chamber stretched out before him, totally empty. He shambled down the hall, but just as he passed the turbo lift, the door flew open. Theron tried to wheel around and deliver a spinning kick to the first guard coming through the door, but as he planted his left foot and tried to push off for leverage, his calf seized up again. His leg caved beneath him, and instead of pulling off a dazzling martial arts move that left his opponent incapacitated, he ended up in a sweaty pile on the floor. Theron, a familiar voice said, and he looked up to see Nostaral standing over him, lightsaber in hand. Thought you were another security patrol, Theron grunted through the pain as the Jedi extended a hand to help him up. I ran into them on my way to the lift, the Jedi replied, his voice grim. In a lighter tone, he added, Why are you in your underwear? Didn't want you to feel awkward, Theron said, nodding at the Keldor's own near nakedness as they leaned on him for support. He stepped gingerly on his cramping leg and winced in pain. Before the Jedi could ask about it, a pair of guards from the pursuing security patrol poked their heads around the corner and fired. The Jedi stepped in front of Theron and batted away the blaster bolts before using the Force to hurl the guards back around the corner. From the grunts and groans, it was clear they had slammed into the other members of the team, hard enough to inflict real damage. Come on, Nostaral said, using one hand to help hold Theron upright while the other kept a firm grip on his lightsaber. Together they staggered the last 20 meters to the sealed door ahead of them. Theron dropped to a knee to relieve the pressure on his injured leg, pulling the slicer spike from his boot, and set to work on the door. At the same time, Nostaral hurled his lightsaber down the hall, striking down a guard who'd dared to peek around the corner. I can't hold them off forever, Theron, he said, and reinforcements are on the way. As if summoned by his words, the turbolift door slid open again, spilling out another half-dozen armored Imperial soldiers. Got it, Theron said, yanking his spike free and crawling forward on his hands and knees as the door slid open. Nostaral was right behind him, and as the guards in the hall opened fire, the two men rolled for cover on either side of the door's interior. With the bolts ricocheting off the floor, the Jedi reached up and jammed his lightsaber into the access panel on the wall, sending off a shower of sparks as the door slammed shut. To Theron's surprise, the room was empty except for a control panel along the periphery, a large opaque crystal sphere in the center, and three figures with facial tattoos and black robes sitting cross-legged on the floor around the sphere. Two were human males, one younger with white skin, the other older with dark skin. The third was a male red-skinned Sith pureblood. Their eyes were closed, and they appeared to be lost deep in meditation. Nostaral sprang to his feet and hurled his lightsaber, but he wasn't aiming at any of the figures on the floor. The whirling blade flew over their heads and ricocheted off the crystal sphere before returning to the Jedi's hand, leaving no mark on the surface. Simultaneously, the eyes of all three figures on the floor snapped open, and they sprang to their feet, their weapons flaring to life. Instead of conventional weapons, the Sith held a pair of slightly shorter purple blades, one in each hand, while the dark-skinned man wielded a long, double-bladed lightsaber that seemed to shift between crimson and black. I see you've got some new friends, Nostaral said to the apprentice he had faced before. When he didn't reply, the Jedi said to Theron, Let me deal with them. You find a way to get inside Carrad's command pod and stop her from destroying the Republic fleet. And they're leaving us on a cliffhanger again. There we go. So the battle is about to commence in Chapter 32. We'll come back to that in the next Star Wars reading. We'll finish up Chapters 32, 33, and the epilogue. And then we're done with this book. Took longer than it should have, but that's the way it goes sometimes. All right, who we got on? Vesper's here. So, I'm not seeing anybody on that I follow that's, I mean, there's some people playing D&D and stuff, but I'm not going to raid them. So I guess we are done for the night. I will just call it there, and I will see you all in the Friday reading of Plato the Republic. I think we're on book 4. And good night, Vesper. See you next time. Have a good night.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. Just tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing in my ears. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations.